August 1944, Brittany, France. The Americans had been sweeping the Germans out of France for 2 months. Patton's Third Army was moving east fast, sometimes 50 miles in a day. Town after town, the Germans falling back ahead of them. The road was safe. The route was mapped. There was no reason to stop. The column stopped at 6:30. Corporal James Reed climbed out of his truck and walked forward. 200 yards ahead, at the entrance to a French village, a man in a suit was standing in the middle of the road. Behind him, a wooden barricade. Behind that, the village. He was not armed. He was not a soldier. He was the mayor, and he was not moving. By noon, the situation had reached Patton's desk. By 2 o'clock, Patton's Jeep was on the road. This is what happened when one unarmed French mayor stopped the entire U.S. Third Army for 6 hours, and what Patton did when he got there. But to understand why that mayor was standing in the road, you need to understand what he had seen the week before. The village of Targat was 4 miles east of Santo. Same size, same kind of people, farmers, shopkeepers, families who had lived in the same stone houses for generations. When an American convoy passed through Targat 7 days earlier, the villagers had lined the road. Children waved. The soldiers waved back. After 4 years of German occupation, the Americans were liberators. They were welcome. Nobody intended what happened next. A supply truck, turning a corner too wide on a narrow lane, clipped the edge of a stone wall that had stood since the French Revolution. The wall did not collapse, not immediately, but a 2-foot section crumbled into the road. The driver stopped. He looked at it. He had no way to fix it. He kept moving. The convoy kept moving. 3 vehicles later, a wheel caught the edge of the damaged section and pulled another foot of wall into the road. By the time the last vehicle cleared the village, 8 feet of wall were gone. The wall surrounded the village cemetery. The convoy didn't know that. They were moving fast, focused forward, doing their job. Nobody had meant any harm. Nobody stopped because nobody knew. By the time the last truck passed, the drivers in front had been moving for half an hour and had no idea what had happened behind them. But the villagers knew. The mayor of Targat wrote a letter. He addressed it to the American military. He explained what had happened. He asked for acknowledgement. He asked for accountability. He never received a response. Now consider what that meant. 4 years of German occupation. Your village finally liberated. Americans arrive, supposedly the good guys, and they damage something sacred, a cemetery wall, a place where your ancestors rest. And when you write to them about it, you hear nothing. Imagine that silence, just the broken stones and the empty mailbox. Maurice Blanchard, the mayor of Santo, was his cousin. He had visited Targat the week before. He had seen the broken wall with his own eyes. He had helped clear the stones from the road. He knew what could happen. Now understand what Santo was. A small village of 200 people. 1 well, 1 road in, 1 road out. A church built in 1647, whose walls lined both sides of the road at the narrowest point. A school right next to it. A water pipe that ran directly under the road, the only water source for the entire village. If a convoy came through and damaged that pipe, his people would have no water. If a truck clipped that church wall, 3 centuries of history would be scarred forever. If a heavy vehicle hit that school, children could die. He had seen what happened to Targat. He had seen the Americans move on without stopping. He had seen the letter go unanswered. So when the convoy appeared at 6:30, Blanchard did not wait. He put on his best suit. He placed a wooden barricade across the road, and he stood in front of it. He wasn't going to let them through. Not until he was certain, absolutely certain, that his village would be safe. This was a man who had kept his village alive for 4 years under German occupation. He had negotiated. He had resisted. He had protected his people. He wasn't about to let an American convoy undo everything he had fought to preserve. And when Lieutenant Frank Briscoe walked up to that barricade, young, frustrated, armed, backed by the full power of the United States military, Blanchard didn't flinch. He looked Briscoe in the eye and gave him the same answer he gave everyone who followed. Note: Lieutenant Frank Briscoe was 24 years old. From Cincinnati. He had been in France for 2 months. His French was limited, a phrase book and 2 weeks of practice. Blanchard's English was limited to what he had learned in school 30 years ago. They understood each other perfectly. Briscoe tried for 40 minutes. He offered alternatives. The convoy would go slowly, single file. He would walk beside the first vehicle himself. He would take personal responsibility for any damage. Blanchard refused. Briscoe pointed out there was a war happening. The Germans were retreating, but every hour this convoy sat still was an hour the Germans used to regroup. Reinforcements. New defensive positions. More American soldiers would die because of this delay. Blanchard acknowledged this. He still refused. He offered an explanation, one Briscoe eventually pieced together with the phrase book and hand gestures. The water pipe ran directly under the road. Last week, a convoy had damaged a pipe in another village. He had seen it with his own eyes. He would not risk his water supply. He would not risk his people going thirsty for 2 weeks while repairs were made. He would not risk the church. He would not risk the school. He would not risk the children. Briscoe radioed up the chain. His battalion commander tried. A higher rank. More authority. More persuasion. He walked up to that barricade with all the confidence of an officer who had never been refused by a civilian. Blanchard refused him too. The regimental commander tried. A man who had stormed beaches. A man who had ordered men into battle. He stood in front of a wooden barricade built by a farmer in a suit, and he could not move him. Division got involved. Officers who commanded thousands of soldiers. Men who directed artillery and coordinated armor. They tried negotiation. They tried authority. They tried everything. Every single one got the same answer. No. 6 hours passed. 6 hours. The sun rose higher. The convoy stretched back as far as you could see. Hundreds of vehicles. Thousands of soldiers. All stopped. Some of them ate their rations. Some slept against their trucks. Some just sat in the dust and wondered how a French mayor had brought the United States Army to a halt. At 1:1 in the afternoon, the situation reached 3rd Army Headquarters. Patton's operations officer, Colonel Arthur Graham, brought it to him personally. He knew his general. He knew how Patton hated delays. He knew how Patton valued momentum. He knew, better than anyone, that this was not going to be a comfortable conversation. "Sir, we have a French mayor blocking a convoy column in Brittany. He's refused to move for 6 hours. Division is requesting guidance." Patton looked up from the map. He had been planning the next phase of the advance. Every hour counted. Every mile mattered. The Germans were retreating, but retreating armies could regroup, could dig in, could counterattack. 6 hours, Patton said. "Yes, sir." The convoy commander tried negotiation. Battalion commander. Regimental commander. Division is now involved. The mayor won't move. Patton was quiet for a moment. "What's his reason?" Graham explained. "The water pipe, the church, the school, the damage in the neighboring village, the letter that was never answered, the refusal to risk his village." Patton leaned back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. The room was silent. Then he said 2 words, "Get my jeep." Graham stared. "Sir, we can continue up the chain of command." The civil affairs officer could. "It's been 6 hours, Colonel. Get my jeep." The jeep covered the distance in 40 minutes. When Patton arrived at the barricade, the scene had not changed. Not 1 inch. Blanchard was still standing in the middle of the road. Still in his best suit. Still unmoved. The wooden barricade was still behind him. The village was still behind that. And the convoy stretched back as far as you could see. Hundreds of vehicles, thousands of soldiers, all stopped. Some of them were eating. Some were sleeping against their trucks. They had been there for 6 hours. Patton got out of the jeep. He walked toward the barricade. 3 stars on his helmet. 4 on his collar. The most feared general in the American military. A man who had slapped a soldier in a field hospital and faced a court-martial. A man who had driven his men through mud and blood across North Africa and Sicily. A man who believed, with every fiber of his being, that aggression won wars. Blanchard watched him approach. He saw the 3 stars. He saw the reputation. He saw the legend walking toward him. He did not move. Patton stopped 2 feet from the barricade. He looked at Blanchard. Blanchard looked at him. Neither man spoke. Patton's interpreter was a sergeant named Paul Darrow, 26 years old, from New Orleans. His parents were French. He had been in this war long enough to know that whatever was about to happen, he would be in the middle of it. Patton spoke first. "Tell him who I am." Darrow translated. Blanchard nodded. He knew. Patton said, "Tell him I understand he has concerns about the pipe." Blanchard listened. He nodded again. He watched Patton's face. He had been reading faces for 4 years, calculating whether the person across from him was going to honor what they said or use it as a way to get what they wanted. Patton said, "Ask him what it would take to fix the pipe if it was damaged." Blanchard considered this. He gave an answer. Darrow translated. "He says the pipe costs about 400 francs to replace, plus 2 weeks without water while it's repaired." Patton said, "Tell him I will give him 800 francs now, today, before the convoy moves. And if the pipe is damaged, I will have engineers repair it within 24 hours. Not 2 weeks. 1 day." Blanchard listened. His expression did not change. He replied. Darrow translated. "He says the money doesn't matter. The church was built in 1647. If a vehicle clips the corner, no amount of money fixes that." Patton looked at the church. Stone walls, 3 centuries old. The road was narrow. A large vehicle taking the corner badly could absolutely clip the wall. He turned back to Blanchard. "Ask him if he would walk with me through the village." Blanchard was surprised by this. He looked at Patton carefully. He had not expected this. A general, a legend, asking to walk through a small village, with a mayor in a suit, like equals. Then Blanchard nodded. They walked together, just the 2 of them, with Darrow a few feet behind, through the barricade, down the main road of the village, past the church, past the school, past the well, all the way to the other end where the road opened up again. Patton didn't speak while they walked. He looked at the road. He looked at the walls. He measured the width with his eyes. He calculated. He planned. When they reached the other end, Patton turned to Darrow. "Tell him," Patton said, "the convoy vehicles. I can route the larger trucks around the village on the farm track to the north. I saw it coming in. The track can handle it. Only the lighter vehicles come through the village, and they come through at walking speed with a guide on each side." Blanchard listened to the translation. His face remained still, unreadable. He had spent 4 years reading the faces of German officers, French collaborators, and men who promised safety and delivered betrayal. He knew how to wait. He knew how to watch. He asked a question. Darrow translated. "He wants to know who provides the guides." Patton didn't hesitate. "His people. We don't touch anything. His people walk beside each vehicle through the village. If anything gets too close, they stop the vehicle." Blanchard was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked another question. Darrow's expression shifted slightly as he translated. "He asks if you give your word." Patton looked at Blanchard. 3 stars on his helmet. A legend. A man who had commanded armies and conquered nations. He could have ordered this man arrested. He could have had the barricade bulldozed. He could have done what any other general would have done. Instead, he said, "Tell him yes." Blanchard studied Patton's face. The silence stretched between them. This was the moment, the test. Blanchard had been testing everyone who walked up to this barricade for 6 hours. He had tested the lieutenant. He had tested the battalion commander. He had tested the regimental commander. He had tested division. None of them passed. Now he was testing the general. "One more question." Blanchard's voice was calm, measured. He asked it slowly, deliberately, as if he were weighing every word. Darrow listened. His face changed. He translated. He says, "You are the general. You are busy. You have a war to win. Why did you come here yourself?" Patton was quiet. This was the question. The one Blanchard had been saving. The one that would tell him everything he needed to know about the man standing in front of him. Patton could have said, "Because my army is stuck." He could have said, "Because my officers failed." He could have said, "Because I'm the only one who can get you to move." He could have said 100 things that were true, practical, and reasonable. Instead, Patton said something else. "Tell him because this is his village. He has kept it alive for 4 years. He's right to protect it." He paused. The silence stretched. Then he spoke again. "A man who won't fight for what's his isn't worth fighting for. Tell him I came because he deserved the answer from me, not from a lieutenant." Darrow translated. The words hung in the air. Blanchard listened. His expression did not change. But he heard what was said. He understood what was meant. This general, this legend, this warrior, this man with 3 stars on his helmet had come here to show respect. Not to command. Not to threaten. Not to bulldoze his way through. To respect. Blanchard looked at Patton for a long moment. The sun was high now. The shadows were short. The convoy was still waiting. Thousands of soldiers still waiting. The war still waiting. Then Blanchard turned. He walked back toward the barricade. He walked past Patton, past Darrow, down the road, past the church, past the school, past the well. He walked to the barricade. He stood in front of it. And then he moved himself. He stepped aside. He lifted one end of the barricade. He dragged it off the road. The road was clear. Patton watched him. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply walked back to his jeep. And the convoy began to move. The convoy took 3 hours to pass through Santo. The large vehicles, the heavy trucks, the armored vehicles, the ones that could do the most damage, went north on the farm track just as Patton had promised. The lighter vehicles came through the village one at a time, moving at walking speed. And on each side of every vehicle walked a resident of Santo. Farmers in worn-out clothes, shopkeepers in their aprons, the school teacher, who had spent 4 years teaching children under German occupation. They walked beside each truck, each jeep, each supply vehicle. They watched the walls. They watched the corners. They called out if anything came too close. Not one stone was touched. Not the church built in 1647. Not the school. Not the well. Not the water pipe that ran under the road. The convoy passed through the village without leaving a trace. And then something happened. Something that wasn't in any official report. Something that wasn't ordered. Something that wasn't planned. Before the last vehicle cleared the village, Maurice Blanchard was standing at the edge of the road. He had a bottle of wine in his hands. He stepped forward. He stopped Patton's jeep. Patton looked up. Blanchard held out the bottle. He didn't say a word. No speech. No thanks. No explanation. Just the wine. Patton looked at the bottle. He looked at Blanchard. Then he took it. He nodded once. A single nod. That was all. But it was enough. Blanchard nodded back. Then he stepped away from the jeep. The jeep moved on. The convoy cleared the village. The road was empty again. Later that evening, Lieutenant Frank Briscoe wrote his report. He described the delay. He described the resolution. He described the route the convoy had taken. Then he added one line. Note: General Patton resolved situation personally. Recommend this approach for similar situations. The report went up the chain. It was filed. It was archived. It became one of thousands of reports generated during the war. But that wasn't how the story spread. Patton never mentioned the incident. Not in his diary. Not in any letter. He never told anyone about the walk. He never told anyone about the wine. He never told anyone about the mayor who had stopped his army for 6 hours. But Briscoe told it. Reed told it. Darrow told it. It moved through the army the way things move, not through official channels. Not through memos and reports. Through soldiers who had been there. Through soldiers who had seen it. Through soldiers who told the story to their buddies, who told it to their buddies, who told it to their families when they went home. The detail everyone remembered was the walk. The general with 3 stars on his helmet, walking slowly through the village with a farmer in a suit, looking at the walls of a church built in 1647. Neither of them talking, just looking. A general who could have ordered anything. A general who could have used force. A general who had thousands of soldiers and hundreds of vehicles and the full weight of the United States military behind him. Walking through a village, with a mayor, looking at walls. It was a story that said something about Patton. Something about respect. Something about leadership. Something about what happens when power meets principle and finds a way forward. It was a story that said, Patton wasn't just a warrior. He was a man who knew when not to fight, and that was worth remembering. The story became legend, not because it was about a battle, not because it was about strategy, not because it was about tactics or logistics or the movement of armies. It became legend because it was about something deeper. It was about a farmer in a suit who stood his ground against an army. It was about a general who walked through a village with a man who had refused him for 6 hours. It was about respect. It was about principle. It was about 2 men who understood something that armies often forget. That war isn't just about conquering territory. It's about people. It's about villages. It's about water pipes and school walls and churches built in 1647. It's about the things that matter to people on the ground. Patton understood this. At least in this moment he did. He could have ordered the barricade removed. He could have arrested Blanchard. He could have had the village encircled. He could have done what 100 other generals would have done. Use force, move the army, and leave the consequences for someone else to clean up. He didn't. Instead, he walked. He looked. He listened. He found a solution that protected the village and moved the army. A solution that respected Blanchard's authority and Patton's mission. A solution that didn't require anyone to surrender anything except their assumptions about how the world works. That's why the story spread. That's why soldiers remembered it. That's why they told their children. That's why it became more than just an incident report. Because it revealed something about Patton that the textbooks don't capture. The textbooks describe a warrior, a brilliant strategist, a man of aggression and ambition, a man who believed that attack was the only option, a man who once said, "We shall attack and attack until we are exhausted, and then we shall attack again." But in Santo, in August 1944, Patton did something different. He didn't attack. He waited. He walked. He listened. He found a way that didn't require destroying what someone else had built. And that's the Patton the soldiers remembered. The Patton who walked through a village with a mayor in a suit. The Patton who accepted a bottle of wine from the man who had stopped his army. The Patton who nodded once and moved on. Not a general who won a battle. A general who won respect. Now here's the question, and it's a question worth considering. Was Patton right to go himself? He lost 6 hours of momentum. 6 hours that the Germans could have used to regroup. 6 hours that could have cost lives. 6 hours that could have changed the course of the advance. Or did he gain something more valuable? Did he earn the trust of a village? Did he show his soldiers what leadership looks like? Did he prove that power doesn't have to be cruel to be effective? Let us know what you think in the comments. Was it a waste of time? Or was it the most important thing Patton did that day? And if you want to hear about the time Patton found out his own son-in-law was being held in a German prison camp, and what he did about it, something Eisenhower never officially approved, that story is coming next. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it, because Patton had a way of doing things that nobody expected. And the next story might be the most surprising one of all. So here's what we know. One unarmed French mayor stopped the Third Army for 6 hours. He stood his ground against a lieutenant, a battalion commander, a regimental commander, division, and he didn't move. Then Patton showed up. And instead of bulldozing through, he walked. He listened. He found a solution that protected the village and moved the army. And when it was over, the mayor gave him wine. That's the kind of story you don't forget. That's the kind of story that makes you think differently about what leadership really looks like. That's the kind of story that spreads. Now I want to hear from you. Was Patton right to go himself? 6 hours is a long time in a war. The Germans were regrouping. Every hour mattered. Could an engineer have solved this without the general? Or did Patton understand something deeper? That in war, trust matters more than speed? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed the story, hit subscribe. I post new stories like this every day. Stories about history's most fascinating moments. Stories about the decisions that shaped the world. Stories about the people who refused to back down. Next up, the time Patton found out his own son-in-law was being held in a German prison camp. What he did next, something Eisenhower never officially approved, might be the most dangerous thing he ever attempted. You're not going to want to miss this one. Subscribe now. I'll see you in the next video.